Fox News at Night host Trace Gallagher joins me now. Trace, what are you learning about this plane and the reason it went down?
A couple of things real quick, Jesse, just to kind of go over what Rich was asking there about people on the ground. Rich Zioli, we do now know that there are several reports that people on the ground were injured. In fact, saying there are several injuries on the ground. So that gives you an idea of how powerful this was when it hit the intersection. It was in the middle of the intersection, didn't necessarily hit the mall, the Roosevelt Mall, which has stores like Macy's and Ross Dress for Less and restaurants around there. It hit an intersection, and the reports are there were several injuries on the ground and row houses on fire. It's important also to note, Jesse, the weather, just so we have clarity on this. The weather at the time of the takeoff at 6:06, temperature was 49 degrees, light rain, some fog, and wind gusts of 30 miles per hour. There is nothing to indicate any trouble there. If you look now at the flight data, it shows that at 6:06, the plane took off and it disappeared from radar 30 seconds later, which is an indication that sometime between 25 and 30 seconds, something catastrophic happened, because as you look at the video, there appeared to be some type of flames, whether it was an engine, whether it was inside the plane, unclear. But before it hit the ground, there were some kind of flames. Again, we have two doctors, two pilots, a patient, and a family member. We keep hearing small plane, and it is a Learjet 55. So just so people know, it's 43 feet wide, it's 55 feet long. So it's not that small, difficult to fly. But this is also a plane owned by Jet Rescue, and people don't recognize that. To a little bit of context, the company is based in Mexico. It flew Baseball Hall of Famer David Ortiz to Boston after he was shot in the Dominican Republic back in 2019. And of course, this same company involved in transporting patients critically ill with COVID-19. One fascinating thing is that Fox 29 now reporting in Philadelphia that because it was a medical transport plane, this is interesting, that the Philadelphia police telling a reporter there outside of McDonald's at Cottman Avenue and Roosevelt Boulevard, near where the plane crashed, there are pieces of the jet everywhere. But what's fascinating is a quarter of a mile away, Jesse, there is a medical oxygen tank that was found. And the speculation has been from pilots and other experts, maybe something happened. Maybe the configuration of this plane was, as you said at the top of your show, it was configured to be a flying ambulance, and there were oxygen tanks. And the possibility that one of those oxygen tanks may have leaked or exploded or something like that is now a very real possibility. And if you look at this, it was going to Springfield, Branson, Missouri, to be specific. That's the airport. And we don't know exactly how much fuel it had on, but they can carry up to 1,400 pounds. So this thing is a flying bomb, especially just taking off. That's why when you see the picture on the middle of your screen there and you see that explosion, this thing could be loaded down with fuel and very dangerous and very lethal to the buildings and the people around the area of the crash scene. And of course, Sean Duffy, as you said, Jesse, has now confirmed there were in fact 6 people on board, several injuries on the ground, and the investigation is not even beginning at this point.
Yeah, when they find the black box, I'm sure they'll learn a lot more. You mentioned this is like a jet ambulance. So if there's an emergency situation with a high-value individual, a VIP, you mentioned Hall of Fame baseball player, this thing's wheels up and is going to the best surgeon in the country. Doesn't matter where they are, whether it's Boston, Missouri, Los Angeles. This thing is ready to go, and it's loaded up. You called it a flying bomb. Explain to me how, if you have all these oxygen tanks, and we don't know what other gases or anything like that they had on the flight, because it's a kind of medically equipped flight, how could that have sparked an incident with the engine?
Well, it's unclear.
Go ahead.
It's unclear that it is the engine, Jesse. I mean, it's unclear that this was an engine. So, I mean, there's a good possibility it was an engine. There's a good possibility it had one. The question is, what is the black box tape going to show? Because that's the flight data recorder. That would record the conversation inside the cockpit, because we have heard nothing, zero, about any contact with the tower between the time this thing went up and then it disappeared from radar, unless they gave it a handoff at some point in 15, 20 seconds. But after that, after the explosion, after this thing lost air capacity and started twisting toward the ground, there is no word that we have heard yet there was any communication with the tower at all. An indication that the pilots were doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is to aviate, to navigate, and then to communicate. And the first thing you want to do is to try to gain control of the aircraft before you start telling people or sending in a mayday of some sort. So I think the basic capacity here for investigators when they get on scene to find out, was this an engine or was this something catastrophic that happened on board the actual plane that had nothing to do with the engines, but it either maybe blew a hole in there and they lost pressure and something else happened and then they lost the ability to fly this plane. So it is really early and really too soon to be able to point at engines and point at anything else because there are so many variables, especially in a medical jet like this that can have various equipment on board that you normally would not have aboard your regular Learjet airplane.
Yeah, it's a unique aircraft. And like you said, it loses the ability to be seen on radar. Now, why does it all of a sudden disappear from radar? Is that because its transponder exploded in the explosion, or what would cause it to go off radar?
It could be a combination of things, Jesse. It either fell so fast. I mean, you look at the video there, and this might have happened. The explosion might have happened at 29 seconds. They're saying that it went off radar at 30 seconds. So it took off at 6:06, and at 6:06:30, this thing went off radar, which is an indication that the explosion might have happened. And remember, it was at, and I heard you talking about this earlier, let me check, it was at 1,600 feet when this thing apparently started losing altitude. So it was at 1,600 feet. It was marked on radar, and then something happened. But at 30 seconds, it went off radar. It's not saying, and this thing didn't happen at 26 seconds or 23 seconds, and by the time it fell out of radar's reach, that was the 30 seconds. It might have been on the ground at that point. So it's really unclear exactly why it went off radar and exactly at what point in the fall it went off the radar. That's something the air traffic controllers would have to tell us. Was it a transponder issue? It's unlikely because they would still kind of have a grasp. They would still have a sweep of it. So it's a pretty good indication that it was at a fairly low altitude when it disappeared from the radar at that point in time, unless it exploded, the transponder went out, and then the plane just went dark. So a lot of questions yet to be answered.
Yeah, the NTSB, they're going to have their hands full between this and the Potomac. Trace Gallagher, thank you so much.